Welcome on this research at in Nieuwegein, which is close to my home in Houten, so that's nice. And I will talk to you today about, well, you've read the title for a few months now, Voodoo, Rats, Growth Problems, and the dark history behind the theory of mindset. And, well, I'm going to talk about mindset, I guess. And the funny thing is, the nice thing is, you probably already know about mindset, so that makes it a lot easier for me. You know what mindset is, probably you've read about it, and I mean, there are even children's books about mindset. This is a book written for children with a fantastic elastic brain, and you already probably know that mindset is an industry, so it's a commercial business in a sense. It's being sold, there are books being sold about it, and so I don't have to explain a lot about it, so why am I presenting anything about it anyway? And you can see, if you look at Google Trends, for example, about growth mindset, that's one aspect of mindset, you'll see that mindset is, well, in fashion, it's the in thing, and this is from 2004 till recently, and you see there's always these gaps in there, but I mean, you see it's in fashion. And for the past few years, really, past 3 years, I think I've studied mindset. I've studied this thing. What is it? It looks so simple. It's a very simple thing. It's a theory that's really in fashion because it can be explained in one sentence, basically. And when I studied it, I really felt like I was going down a rabbit hole like Alice in a sense, because there's so much to it. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about. And that's also what we, Pedro, Paul, and me have described in our forthcoming book. And you can guess who's who here in these people. I like to see myself as one of these three, and the others as well. And that's what I've described in a chapter in a forthcoming book that's coming out next month. It's called Juffen zijn toffer dan meesters. And we don't have it will also be translated into English, I believe. And we don't have a title yet, but I think it will be something like this. That's what I came up with anyway. It's called Teachers Are Cooler Than Teachers in a sense. So that's coming. And I'm describing now some of the things I've found out and that I have written down in the chapter in the book, but it's not all. I've written down more, and there's so much to it. I'm just giving you a sample. I'll do it in 40 minutes. I've written down in the chapter in the book, but that's not all. Let's go down. I've written down more, and there's so much to it. I'm just giving. First, a short overview. I'll talk about the history. That's the thing, of course, the history of key persons and their findings. I'll talk about what is mindset, what are the effects of interventions, because that's the main thing about it. People are trying to change people's mindset. And I'll discuss a few problems with the concept, and these will come up when I discuss them. And of course, I'll draw a few conclusions with that help. Let's first start. Well, where do you start? Well, I decided to start with this guy. You may probably know this guy. Who is this? It's Ivan Pavlov, a famous Russian physiologist, who's usually considered also to be a sort of psychologist, and he studied a phenomenon called what we now call classical conditioning. And you know this phenomenon probably. It's learning by association. So it's like when you present a dog with food, then they will salivate, it starts salivating, and when you blow on whistle, they usually react to it, but they don't start salivating. And when you associate the two, they learn. That's basically the basic part of learning in a sense. It's a very physiological thing. And Pavlov studied this phenomenon in his laboratory with his colleagues for years, after he had already won a Nobel Prize actually. And one of the phenomena he found was generalization and discrimination. You can train dogs and other animals to discriminate between different stimuli. Like you start salivating when you're shown a circle, and you don't salivate when you get punished, and you're shown a lips, for example. And what he found was, what happens if you make the circle a bit more like an ellipse, and what happens if you make the ellipse a bit more like a circle? So it gets a bit confusing. But that's what Pavlov did. And you give an electrical shock when you show an ellipse, and you present it with food, and you show a circle. And then you make it more confusing to the dog. So this is a bit like torture in a sense. It is. It's torturing an animal here. And what happens is, and it was I showed it on the slide, it's called what Pavlov called experimental neurosis. Pavlov thought this may be basics for human neurosis as well, because the dog gets mightily confused and gets in a sort of stress state, because they really don't know how to react to what they're seeing. If they're shown some figure that's in between there, between a circle and an ellipse, but they get confused. And that's basically what it started out with, this confusing thing in a dog where it basically gets terrified and sort of neurotic reaction that it gives. And this could stay for weeks in the dog. You really have to unlearn that for the dog. So next up is this other guy. This is also a famous person. He's used to be the most famous psychologist in the world, actually, for quite some time. This is Skinner, E.F. Skinner, Burroughs Fred Skinner. And what did he study? Well, he studied operant conditioning. That's the other type of conditioning, where you voluntarily react to stimuli because they are reinforcing. They give you a reward, in a sense. That's basically the basic part of operant conditioning. And Skinner studied this phenomenon for a long time, his whole life, I think. And what he found was, well, basically he drove the whole theory of behaviorism, radical behaviorism, where there's this, the basic part is where you can reinforce behavior, you can get more of it by reinforcing it, or by taking away something bad, and you can punish behavior by giving someone, for example, an electrical shock, something bad, or taking away something nice from the organism. In this case, a horse, for example. So it's a very simple theory, and this drove a theory of motivation for years. It said, well, how do you motivate people? By giving them rewards, for example, by praising them for what they did, for example. That's the way motivation works. The behavioristic view on motivation. So it's a very simplistic view on what drives behavior by reinforcing, by giving rewards, or by punishing, where Skinner said, well, reinforcing by giving rewards always works better than punishing. That's basically the basic part of it. And for example, Dr. Spock, you may know this guy, wrote a whole book about raising children based on those principles. And some teachers use these principles as well. Maybe you do. But there's more to it. Another guy. Who's this guy then? Well, lots of guys in this presentation. Sorry about that. There's one girl. This is a famous French guy. No, it's Binet. Alfred Binet. The French guy who invented the intelligence test in the first part of the 20th century, 1905, I think. Yeah, 95. He created, together with his colleague Theodore Simon, he created what's now called the first intelligence test. Well, this has some influence on, well, I could say Western society in general. Because people basically flew away with that idea, and it was very useful, for example, for the First World War, when they really needed skilled people for new machines. How do you do that? By testing them, of course. Well, Pavlov created the first intelligence test, and what many people think is Pavlov invented IQ. So this IQ, you know your own IQ, that's the number between 100 and 280%. Oh, I'm not sure. But that's the basic number, and actually Pavlov didn't invent that number. One of the biggest problems here in the history of intelligence testing is that Pavlov died very prematurely in 1911. He died, and he didn't witness what happened with this concept of intelligence, which Binet, I'm sorry, I'm talking about Binet. He died in 1911, and people basically took his idea and created something different from it. And Binet always said, intelligence is not a static entity, it's something that can change. You can measure it, but you can also use that to change it. He said, he called the view that intelligence would be static, he called that brutal pessimism. I'm not sure if it said so in English, but that's what I found anyway. So the IQs was invented after the end. And these are all people who are involved in this whole concept of the backbone of mindset, so I'm coming to that. And then I found this other guy, you probably don't know this guy. This guy is called Kurt Richter, and he did a study that I've included in the book because it's so horrific. I love horrific studies. He did some experiments on what he found in anthropology. He found some literature on what's called voodoo death. And what is voodoo death? Basically, it's when you do something that's taboo in a society. If you do something when you pick some flowers on a day when you're not supposed to pick flowers. And then this medicine guy from your village comes to you and says, this means you will die tomorrow. And if you take this very seriously, well, there are some known cases. This is what Richter describes based on work by Walter Cannon from the early 20th century. And there's lots of documented cases where they said, well, people really did die the next day, and nobody knew why. And he said, well, maybe I can study it. And he wrote an article on that in 1957. This was published, and it has this lovely title on the phenomenon of sudden death in animals and man. And that's something you don't see that often these days. Articles with titles like that. And what he did was, well, what did he do? Let's see. Well, what he did was he studied voodoo, indeed, and he also used a task that is still being used these days, where you basically drown a rat. You put a rat in this glass, a bottle in a sense, and you put it in there and you measure how long it takes before the rat dies. This is still being used to study some medicines. So they inject medicine in a rat and see if it has some influence. I found out. And Richter basically started this, but it's worse than that actually. So he put rats in water jars and there was no escape from that. And what happens is, if the rat seems to understand, in a sense, if the rat sees that there's really no escape, they usually quickly die. And Richter tried some experiments with that, with the water temperature, for example. This has some influence on the length, and there's some graphs in the article as well to show that. And so he had some set, and he used wild rats and tamed rats. And the wild rats, they're really not used to this. They die more quickly. And he did this with the first set of rats, and they give up relatively quickly and die. And then he had the second set of rats, and what he did there was he basically, after a few minutes, he took them out of the water. And then, when they were fully rested, he put them back in the water. And when you do that a few times, then when you put them back in the water, the rat seems to hope for better to be taken out, and they swim for days. Until completely exhausted, and then they die. And that's a lovely story, isn't it? So basically, it's about if you're completely in despair, if the sense is I have no control over what happens, then that's bad for you. That's basically what this should say. Yeah, let's quickly move on. Because this is used, that's the funny thing about it, this is used in a movement called positive psychology, actually. This is all based on positive, this is the basics of something called positive psychology. That's a big movement that started in the United States with this guy. This guy is called Martin Seligman. He started the movement of positive psychology. And he studied the same kind of phenomenon that Richter did, but in a more, less shocking way, actually in a quite a shocking way as well, because he studied something that's called learned helplessness. That's more or less the same thing as Richter studied. And how did he do that? Basically by, in this case, not rats, but using dogs. And what learned helplessness is that if you're unable to avoid a negative stimulus, a painful stimulus, if you're completely unable to avoid that, then you learn that you can't escape the situation, and basically you lie down and do nothing anymore. I was going to compare this to a burnout or something. That's a long definition which you can read afterwards on history. Basically, what he did was he used dogs this time. He had this box, and the dog would be alerted with a lamp that a shock would be coming. And then if the dog would jump over the fence, then they would avoid the shock. Well, that works fine. These dogs learn this very quickly. So you can avoid a shock by looking at the lamp, and if it turns on, move. That's the first. That's the first. The naive dogs, they learn to avoid the shock. We have another group of dogs, and we use lots of animals in this research. And they, before he did this, they were given shocks, just shocks. They were tortured again in advance, given shocks without escape. What happens when you give them the same training task there? Basically, they don't learn anything. They don't learn anything. They just lie down, and whimper, and they make some noise, and basically they wait until it's over, this ordeal. And this you might call, this is what Seligman calls, they show a helpless pattern. They've learned that what they do doesn't really matter, that they can't avoid the shock, and even when they can, they will still show this helpless pattern. And positive psychology is basically the study of how do you overcome this pattern. If a dog or a human shows this kind of behavior, is there a way of overcoming it? Final guy here. That's the final guy, and then I'll shortly discussing. This is Albert Bandura, famous guy in psychology. You can compare him with this kind of material. Yeah, he wrote the first article on this concept of self-efficacy that you may all be familiar with, which is the sense I'm up to this task. I'm able to do this task. He wrote this in 1977, and I'm mentioning him because when I discuss my next person, you will see that she wrote with Bandura as well. And usually they're confused with Albert, but it's his daughter actually that she worked with. So he showed that there's always some expectation in people, and this was new in 1977 because this was still when behaviorism was still much in fashion in a sense. So he showed that expectations do have some influence on people's behavior. And this looks a bit like mindset. Well, I always try to compare them, they're not really that different, really. So, we have a few people here. We have Pavlov, Skinner, Binet, Richter, Seligman, and Bandura, and they all introduce these different concepts, and they are behind mindset. So, let's go to mindset then. Let's see. Yeah. Now, you may know this person then. This is the mindset person. This is Carol Dweck. Born in 1946, on the same day as my mother, actually. She has done research on mindset, but basically in the line of Bandura. Bandura published in 1977, and basically her first work is from 1978, 1979, and it's more or less about mindset. That's the interesting thing about it. And she's still publishing about it. But first it became popular. It first became popular in 2006 when Carol Dweck published. She's a Stanford professor, by the way. When she published a book called Mindset, I think the Science of Behavior or something like that. Basically, what that book is about is how do people interpret success and failure. And you can easily deduce this from just reading the first page of the book, and this goes on for 300 pages. But she states the whole statement is on the first page of the book, basically, with a few examples. What happens when you succeed at a task or when you fail at a task? How do you interpret that failure, for example? And she said, well, your personal vision, that's what she calls it, your personal vision influences that. And this is where she introduces the concept of you can have a growth idea, I can improve myself, or a fixed idea, this is me, I can't do any better than this. This is just my characteristic, something like that. That's what mindset is. Now, Dweck has done a lot of research about it, and I tried to collect that for our book, and I didn't completely succeed. There's so much to it, and actually Dweck herself is part of the confusion there, because she likes to refer to articles that were not published, for example. So You may find lots of references to Dweck and Bandura, 1985, for example. And this study, I'm not even sure if it exists. She refers to it, she says, well, it's an unpublished manuscript, she says in the first article, and then she says, well, it's a submitted article, but she doesn't say where it's submitted, and I've never been able to find that article. And it's a basic article about it. It's referred to lots of times in the literature, and I'm not even sure if it exists. But the earliest research where Dweck assumed that what I've just told you about all these helpless patterns that it may apply to people as well. She studied this the first time around 1973, when she published with Pucci. And already in the conclusion of that article, you can see that she talks about achieving greater attribution of success and failure to expenditure of effort. Basically, she already says, well, maybe you can change someone's mindset. It's not called that yet, that will, it will be 30 years before she called it mindset, but it's the same idea, basically. The suggested procedure is called attribution retraining. It sounds really like an army thing or something. But of course, it's the same thing as a growth mindset training or something. It's exactly the same thing. That's a nice suggestion. So what she did was she gave children impossible problems. So problems that she was sure that these children could not solve, and then she observed what these children did. How do they react? And then she found basically two types of reactions that children show. A very simple basis. Published in my birth year. And from that she basically developed a sort of training where she says, well, this is the kind of thing they say. It's the brain is like a muscle. If you just Google for mindset in Google Images, then this is the kind of thing you'll find. My growth is in my hands, things like that. So the brain is like a muscle. And I think in our first book we've already discussed that the brain is not a muscle, but okay. But telling people more or less helps. She started more or less a company around this called Brainology. This is their logo, and nowadays she's basically selling their training methods from that. And you always see this kind of thing where basically it says there's one good mindset and there's one bad. And one is locked, that's the fixed mindset, and one is a growth, that's a plan, it's lovely, it's green. One is black, it's black versus white, things like that. Okay. And the growth mindset says, well, I can learn anything I want to, so this is good again, and fixed mindset again is bad. So how do you measure mindset? How do you measure someone's mindset? Well, they have lots of different methods for that. Lots of different methods. This is what you can find on the Brainology website, for example. I think it's 12 questions. I picked 8 from them. I'm not sure. And one problem I have with these questionnaires is that you can immediately see what you're getting at by filling it out. And I always think, well, if I want to have growth mindset, I know exactly what to do on this in this survey, on this questionnaire. But this is an official one. So the alpha is always, Krobach's alpha, if you know, is always higher than 0.80. I've never seen anything lower than that in any research. It's always high because this is completely internally consistent, I think. It's a simple concept. And they found that out as well. So if you look at recent articles about mindset where they try an intervention and they measure it, then usually they say, well, we asserted this belief, this is from an article, using 2 items. So it's a question with 2 items only. It's even more simple. You can learn new things, but you can't really change your basic intelligence, and you have a certain amount of intelligence, and you can't really do much to change it. It's almost the same question. Again, alpha is correct here. Alpha is 0.84. I'm not even sure why it's not 1 actually. So this is typical psychological measure. So a typical result of an intervention study in mindset is this kind of thing. Where it shows that the growth mindset condition is better than a control condition where the kids didn't do anything. Or something like that. So this left side, there's nothing happening there, and the right side, there's lots of things happening. In this study, there's also a sense of purpose training, which there's researchers are not completely sure about if it's the same thing as mindset or not, but actually it works a bit better even than mindset in this case. So does mindset, is it something that you can train? That's a good question. There are some studies on that. And one of them is a big meta-analysis which was published last year, 2018, already a bit further than that. And one of the most surprising things to me was that they picked more than 15,000 studies where they studied mindset, more or less well. But in the end, they had 29 left of that. So 1 in 500 or something was good enough for their selection. That's not a lot. What I found was that from the 43 effect sizes that I found in those studies, about 37 that were not significantly different from 0. So basically, it's disappointing what I found. Total effect size is 0.08, which is low, very low. That's not so good, I guess. And this is what they show in their article, and for us, I guess the most interesting was the one at the bottom, that's the 0.08. That's the mean of all those effect sizes. But you can see here that the larger the study is, usually also the better the study is, the less the effect found. So the small studies, they show these big effects, even negative effects, but the larger studies are all close to 0 here. So there's some trouble here in mindset paradise, I guess. So a few problems with mindset. One of them is that I'm quoting here from Alfie Kohn, for example, who has criticized mindset, but lots of others as well. It's not really an educational theory. It doesn't really say anything about instruction or what a teacher does, for example. It doesn't say anything about educational content or other factors that may influence student behavior and learning effects. So it's not really an educational theory. As an educational scientist, one of my beefs about the mindset theory is that it can't really be falsified. So when a kid doesn't really show learning effects from a true mindset training, for example, you can say, well, you didn't study hard enough or something. You can always explain by saying, well, your mindset is wrong. So the theory is, in a sense, always correct, can always be applied, but it can't really be falsified. You can never say, this has shown that mindset theory is completely wrong. And from a scientific point of view, that's usually bad news. We don't like that. And one other thing that has been found is that Dweck's work centered on little children that were in trouble already, and there the intervention worked very nicely. But in adolescents and in adults, actually it seems to backfire in a sense. It doesn't work at all, and sometimes you find even reverse effects. Sometimes the praising effort gets the reverse effect. Well, why is that? Why doesn't growth feedback always work? Well, actually, it's the reason is that people think. And that's always trouble. There's always trouble when people start thinking. Why don't you find those effects? Well, it has a side effect, praising effort. When people say, you really did well there, and that's because of your effort that you put in. But you don't want to be praised for your effort, you want to be a hero, you want to be that special person. And basically, how it can be interpreted, praising effort all the time, and this is what some people have picked up from their workshops on mindset, is always praise effort, never praise the person. So what people do is they praise the effort, and never the person. And the person says, well, I guess I'm not that special, just put in some effort, and then and there was also a bit of luck involved maybe, and I did fine on the test, but I'm not special. Okay, and it actually is demotivating to some people. So adults and adolescents are different than children. That's what we found out here. That's what theory seems to forget sometimes. Carol Dweck is a perfectly fine scientist because she knows about this. And if you look at interviews with her, she doesn't publish that much anymore. She's in her 70s. She said, well, this is not the way I intended the theory. So one thing is, people don't have this growth mindset or fixed mindset, that's it. It's always a mix. There's always some growth elements involved, and you think, I can improve this, and there's some fixed element where you say, well, this is me, this is what I can do, I can't do any better than that. And Carol Dweck also added that sometimes a fixed mindset may be better than having a growth mindset. So when I read that, I thought, when? Tell me, when is a fixed mindset better than a growth mindset? Because I always read that a growth mindset is better. Let's give 2 examples. That's sexual orientation and age. Now, if you know about the New Rafelband, then the age thing, that's really interesting. Because she says, you feel, basically, when she says, well, studies have shown that people feel better when they act their age, in a sense. When they think, this is my age, this is who I am, in a sense. And she says the same thing about sexual orientation. She says people are happier when they're fine with their own sexual orientation. Well, that's a very controversial statement, and in any case, and a very American statement as well, I think. It shows something more about Carol Dweck than about the research, in a sense. And I tried to find the research that she's referring to, and I couldn't find it. I haven't been able to find the research that says this, that found this, that a fixed mindset is better. So I'm not sure why she's saying this. I haven't been able to find it. So there's some trouble here. So it's controversial. I mean, is it really better to have a fixed sexual orientation mindset or something? Why is it better? Is that not just a cultural or moral issue that's involved? It's not a scientific issue, I think. And where are the sources for that statement? I need sources. Okay. It's fine. So I have some conclusions for you. It's when we talk about mindset, it's not really about the mind, I think, and it's not really a set. So nothing is. If you don't know anything about mindset, it's not a fixed thing in a sense. It's not. So that's very nice. It's a meta conclusion in a sense. Now research has shown has reached mixed results in a sense. So the overall result has been disappointing. So if you read about, we had this treatment and it worked fine, John Bowler is very good at this by saying, well, I changed one word in the feedback that I gave students and a miracle occurred in a sense. It's very much, maybe a bit correct for one student, I'm not sure about it. The overall effect is pretty reduced in a sense. The theory itself cannot really be falsified, so that's a bit of a theoretical problem with the theory. It says that in the basis there's not that much to it, and I think the self-efficacy concept by Voodoo works perfectly fine in a sense. And not everything that happens in the classroom is due to mindset. Many teachers, I think, have picked up on this idea of mindset because they had to visit this workshop for their leraarregister, for example. And then they found out that this is the main thing in education right now, and you have to use it, but there's so much more involved in teaching, of course. So I'd like to thank you for your attention about mindset. Thank you. I'm not sure if there's room for discussion anymore, I think we need to move on. There's room? 8 more minutes. Okay, there's room for questions. If you have a question. Mr. Rijkswijk, Steven has a question. Yes?
In our TED talk, she refers to studies she's done about the Bronx and Indian reserves, where she claims to have improved math to like from the bottom 90% to top 3% from the states. Have you managed to look at those studies?
No, I haven't looked at those studies, but what I did find is that she usually picks students that are at the bottom. So basically, regression to the mean, in a sense, says that whatever you do works for these students. That's one thing. And one other thing I didn't mention in my talk is that Dweck is very ambiguous in a sense, because she is one who says, well, don't take it too seriously in a sense. But she has herself written articles where she says, well, the conflict in the Middle East, for example, can be solved through mindset training. She has done some studies on that even, where she said we had some Israelis and some Palestinians, and we said to them, people's minds can change. And then a miracle occurred, and these people were finally talking to each other, things like that. So she has done some weird stuff with her own theory. So I'm not really sure what her stance on this is. That's an interesting thing, but she seems to pick the right people for her studies. Yeah. Other question, yes?
Do you think there's anything positive about
I'm skeptical, of course. That's my job in a sense. And that's, but in our book, for example, the conclusion that we draw is not that the theory is bullshit or something. Now we say it's more nuanced in a sense. You have to take it with a grain of salt. But I think it's completely obvious that when you have a child who says, well, who has been told that they are unable to do math, for example, for a few years. They say, well, you don't have to do these sums because you can't do it anyway. And sure, this occurs in education. That's bad. So you first have to help the student and say, well, of course you can. Everybody can learn these sums, and you can do as well. I'm going to train you. And I mean, it's not a fixed thing for you. This helps. And it doesn't really matter if you call it growth mindset or you say, well, when you make mistakes, your brain grows more synapses, as Joe Bonoff says, for example. This is a completely idiotic, insane statement. But it doesn't matter for the child. It just matters that they say, well, something occurs in my brain, but I'm just picking up information, and maybe it will help me. So there's of course a deep truth behind all this, but it's translated into this. It's translated into much more than that. There's too much expected from it. Yes.
Something like that. Is that something to tell us about it? If you first indoctrinate somebody else, somebody can himself against university, I cannot do it.
Yeah. People are great at listening to others as well, and they always say to each other, well, next year you're gonna have math in school. That's a difficult thing. And their parents tell them as well. I had math. I hated it when I had math. And so you have to do math. I hated it. I never used it afterwards, and I hated it. And you're gonna do it. Well, that gives you some expectation. That gives the student, the child, some expectation about what to expect. And this, of course, this influences people. You can also say to the child, "Well, you're going to do math. That's great, you know. That's great. You're going to learn lots of stuff, and that's a big difference, of course. Yeah. So don't indoctrinate. Well, we all do. We all do. We always indoctrinate our children. Stop that. Okay. Stop. Now that's a teacher's role as well, of course. Yes. Yes, final question, I guess.
Yeah. What actually go down this lane and spend so much?
Well, one thing is we wrote a few books about educational myths. We have a list of topics, and I love this idea specifically. And actually, people said before I started this, and the same thing was in reverse with build-thinking, which I also studied, visual thinking. They said, well, you can't really study that. This is something that's not part of science, in a sense. This is something so specific, so holistic, so general, you can't study that. I mean, don't go down that road. So that triggered me, of course. I had to go down that road, yeah. And it's a perfect concept to study, but you can see how difficult it is to measure, for example. Yeah. Kind of like grit. Yeah, in our book we also describe grit. It's the other thing where it shows, well, if you just set yourself to it, then if you show grit, then all will turn out fine. It's related to this concept. Yeah. Well, thank you for the questions, and have a nice further day. Thank you.